Pamela Callender is our guest artist today, and we'll be discussing the power of art in education and education in art. Welcome to our inaugural program, Pam. The majority of people seem to feel that art is a luxury and it is often the first subject removed from school curriculum. Would you like to comment on that?
Yes, actually, I think about that a lot, being an educator and an artist. I think the challenge these days for teachers especially is in creating a curriculum in their lesson plans that use art to teach. Teachers are educated themselves in multiple intelligences, so that when they are looking at a classroom of 20 or 30 students, they can identify pretty quickly how a student learns, and at that point adjusts the lessons to each student. It's a pretty intricate way of teaching, but I think that the system is using that model more these days for teachers because art has been taken out of the schools. In defense of the school systems, I have to say, I understand budget cuts. You know, I mean, we all do it. We've all had to do it in our own homes, in our everyday lives. So, you know, and again, being in the public school system, have recognized areas where you have to do with all of the liability these days, security expenses, things that people don't see on a day-to-day basis, like teachers and principals and school boards see and understand the budgets. It's easy to see why they would cut art out and think of it as a luxury. When you think of art, when the average person, I would imagine, thinks of art over the last 30, 40 years, there hasn't been really a huge impact on the way we look at art. We see art as a luxury. We promote art as a luxury. You go to an art gallery, or you hear about artists, famous artists, not so famous artists, local art. Everybody's an artist. So, you know, how can you differentiate that from being something special and more than a luxury? You know.
I know that in the Sarasota schools, they are now setting up a program called Teaching Artists, and they're in the Sarasota school system, and they work along with the standards and benchmarks of the state. Right.
And that's a brilliant program, and I was going to mention that as well. The Sarasota County School Board, in cooperation with the Arts and Cultural Alliance, has organized this program where they will invite artists who are or not teachers and certify them to be more familiar with the way that an educator, a professional educator, would put together, create a curriculum or a lesson plan, because not all artists know about how to put a lesson plan together, you know, but they have a lot to say and they have a lot to offer, and so this program can educate the artist how to become a teaching artist, and they certify them, and the artist then creates a curriculum or a lesson plan, again, using the multiple intelligences. How am I going to reach different people, different learning models? How am I going to incorporate and infuse academics in this learning lesson plan? And once they do that, then they can put it online on the Sarasota County School Board website, and it's called Ed Explore, and they can put this curriculum or this lesson plan on the website, and a teacher, an educator in the system, in the public schools, can invite this teaching artist to their school and work together to again infuse academics in the art program.
To bring a particular event, a particular lesson to the schools. And I know those are done on different grade levels. And also they cover a lot of different forms of art, like theater and music and dance, and it just goes on and on. Now I know that you went to school, you graduated from Eckerd College in St. Pete, and then you went on to get your master's from Goddard in Vermont.
Right.
Can you tell us a little bit about that?
About Goddard?
Uh-huh.
Oh, I'd love to. Goddard has speaking of learning models, it has a very progressive learning model in that it's self-directed. So Vermont, first of all, is a beautiful state, and it's Goddard College. I have my Master's of Fine Art in Interdisciplinary Art. That was my major. What that does is pretty much what we just discussed in how you infuse academics, you collaborate with the community, you bring your art to a force where it does more than just look like a pretty picture, or it's more than painting, it's more than sculpture, it's more than what people consider art.
Do you have a grade level that you specifically are interested in?
Well, funny you should say, because I taught for 10 years in the public school system in Manatee County, and I taught dance. And this is where I became a certified educator and an artist, and then went back to get my Master's of Fine Art in Interdisciplinary Art. And because of my my personal situation now, I do stay home, and I left my job and to stay home and take care of my mom. So during my my education at, that's right, he can edit it. Well, but you're going to have a difference in that.
I know that beat
yeah.
is gonna, yeah, that's okay.
That background fuzz. So I got my Master's of Fine Art in Interdisciplinary Art from Goddard College in Vermont. And again, their learning model was such that you would visit the school and stay for a week residency. You would meet other classmates and work with your advisor. And then you would go home. You would actually create your own curriculum. So I was familiar with that because that's what I did in the public school system. And going back to your question, my favorite age group would be middle school and high school. High school not so much, but middle school I really connect with that age group. And because I had that experience, I understood coming up with a lesson plan and a curriculum. And so for the next 16 weeks, I pretty much told my advisor what I was going to do, how I was going to study, what I was going to study, where I was going to get my information. And then I had to report every 2 weeks, and they would guide me to make sure I stayed on that plan. And then I would go back for the residency again. And there were no grades. It was just, yes, she did what she said she was going to do, or no, she didn't, but she did that, and it would, it counted even more, and it's more interesting, and it's on the right path. And I'll tell you that the bottom line and the most interesting thing I did learn from this was why I made art, not what I made, and that's why I like to say that I use the word art more as a verb than a noun. Mm-hmm. Yeah, because to me, art isn't what you make. Art is what you do. We're all artists. Everybody is an artist. We all have that the human being has that ability to go through a creative process in our brains and in our bodies, and we have that ability to imagine, right? There's an artist called Joseph Beuys, Beuyss, and back in the 50s. He's a German artist, and he actually stopped making objects, and he started doing lectures and became an educator with his lectures on how the creative process, you actually sculpt in your mind. Your mind is the sculpture. This is what you start to sculpt in your mind. When you imagine something, you're actually sculpting it in your mind. And then
so you're creating the blueprint prior to the actual work.
Exactly. And I know you're an artist, so you must do that before you write a children's book. You probably imagine the story in your mind.
I'm one of those.
Sometimes
I just sit down and start writing pretty soon it comes to me. You know, my little boy in the playground turned out to be the girl in the park.
Okay.
Because my muse just took over after a while.
Right.
Completely changed the story.
Exactly, and that's what happens when an artist tries to actually materialize what they're thinking in their head. It never comes out exactly what you think or the way you see it in your mind. It never comes out the way you see it in your mind. Even Dali tried so hard to put on canvas what he saw in his dreams, and you saw how different the objects didn't make sense to anybody except him, of course, and even then they weren't connected.
Yeah, I just figured he was trying to work out of the fourth dimension.
Well, I guess maybe it is a fourth dimension, that kind of imagination. But this is what separates us from animals. We have an imagination. We can imagine just about anything. But then to take it from that level, to take it from the imagination and to materialize something from it is where the art comes in. The art of mastering a skill. So, practice anything over and over and you're going to become really good at it. So if sculpting is your thing, or painting, or writing, or dancing, or singing, or making music, any sort of art form, when you go from in your mind to materializing that thought.
Right, making it a reality.
Making it a reality is the art process.
It's interesting because I know you were a teacher, you were a dancer, and then after your children were raised, you went back to college. Yeah. And then, when you graduated, you went on and got a master's. Right. Now, I think that's a great message to all of our listening audience, because I don't think you should ever be afraid to go back to college. I know when I did, I was living my worst nightmare because I was terrified. But it made me a superb student because I listened, I got help when I needed it. Anybody that offered any help, they were in trouble because then I always went to them. Right. And God love them. I wish I had done that the first time around, but who knew? Well,
that's the beauty. That's the beautiful being of an educator. An educator is there for you, and they want to see you. That's why they're in that business. They want to see you succeed. They want to see you, and they want to guide you and help you when you need it to do what we were just saying, to actually materialize what you had in your. Why did you go back to school? Well, I'm going to help you get there. And that's the. It's not about money when you go to be a teacher, for sure. When you're a teacher, it's about helping people become the best that they can be. And the whole thing about going back to school and going as far as I did, I mean, I didn't have to, but I did that for me. Education is so important. It does what you just said, what you just described. It gave you the feeling that you had that support, that you had that guide, you had people to go to, you had an idea, you had a goal, an incentive, and you went after it. And don't you even doubt for a second that these educators were very creative in the way they helped you, and different from the way they might have helped someone else, you know. And this is, again, where the creative process and the creative thinking and the artistry comes in, the artistry of being an educator. But again, going back to the original question, art in education, they've taken art out again because of budget restraints, and that's understandable to a degree. What does that do? It causes the teacher, the educator, to be more creative in the way they teach. Are they artists? They're artists in education. They're artists in teaching.
Do you think when they take art out of the curriculum, do you think that will lead to outsourcing art lessons? In other words, parents sending their children, like we used to a tutor.
Mm-hmm. Oh, that's a good point. And I think that some communities do have to do that in order for their children to have art in their lives. I think that the program, the Ed Explore program that Sarasota County has, I think is a wonderful model, and I hope all communities, I hope it's successful enough that all communities learn from this and use it as well. It's a way to bring art back into the schools without costing costing the school board more money, but it also helps to educate the teachers how important using art to educate is.
Yes. And it also gives the artist an opportunity for more work, because now they can work in the schools. True. You handle the middle school and upper grades, and I tend to go for the kindergarten and lower elementary. Yeah. But I think between us, we cover, some ground there. Mm-hmm. Of course, no single artist can do it all, but if we all work together, then it's like any other job. The more hands that are involved, the more successful it becomes. And that's true. Sharing your art is important. Sharing your art ideas and process, and talking like we're talking right now about art is all beneficial to bringing artists and education together. There is an organization that came from all of these teaching artists coming together in the Arts and Cultural Alliance program, and Sarasota County School Board program at Explore, and they're calling themselves the Association of Florida Teaching Artists, AFTA, and they have just organized and inviting other artists to join who would like to help teach in the school systems or not in the school systems. Just any artist who is interested in becoming a teaching artist. It's a huge support system, and it certainly does bring all of the artists together. It's a pretty big force. Right, I would say. And it's growing by the day. And it is growing, yeah. When I took the course, I was in, I think, the second class. Mm-hmm. But we don't want to give the impression that this is strictly a Sarasota County event. This is actually nationwide. It's just that it has now come to Sarasota. And unfortunately, it's just dotted across the United States rather than a full picture or a full spread. So it's catching on here and there and everywhere, and it's bound to be successful. Well, it is, because it is missing in the academic arena, and you can't. I just, having been on both sides as an educator and an artist, I was fortunate enough to work in a charter school where, which is another up-and-coming learning model, but it was a charter school that attracted students interested in the arts. Uh-huh. And so I was even double lucky in that aspect. Art was not cut from this school because they were all about the arts. However, academia, for some reason, or maybe, I can't say that they don't, but in the academic
how am I trying to say this?
In the field of academics?
In the field of academics, it is not encouraged to use art to teach, right? And who am I to say it should be? But personally, I would say, yeah, it should be, because of the multiple intelligences that they're trying to incorporate in teaching, using the multiple intelligences. And a very successful way to use that is to include art, to incorporate art in your teaching. I remember teaching when I was teaching dance, and I would have some students who, no matter how many times I showed them, they couldn't get it. But if I danced with them, they got it. Or if I wrote it down on a piece of paper, they could read it and figure it out. Or if I just verbalized it in a certain way, they understood it. If they read about it in a book, or if they saw it on TV, or if they did it themselves, or if they had to, I remember having visual art projects, where they would have to draw things from the period of history where that art, that dance came from, and that helped them to understand the character and the culture of the dance.
Don't you think that when you add art to the curriculum per subject, it makes it more interesting?
Yeah.
It adds life, it adds color. I mean, it's wonderful to know about George Washington,
right?
But it's so much more fun to be able to draw a picture of George when he's little, cutting down the cherry tree, which is probably a fable.
Or coming up with a story like that.
Yes, yes. Or, crossing, I'll never forget the picture of him standing at the head of the boat.
Right.
And,
or making music. Exactly. Or making music. Taking a photograph and telling a child who plays the piano to make a piece of music about that photograph. Crossing over different art disciplines and academics is so successful in learning and teaching. And that's why, again, I call art a verb, not a noun. And art and education and art, it all goes together hand in hand. And thank you to Sarasota County Schools for coming up with this idea, this program to implement in this area.
I kind of accused Pam one time of going to Vermont to get her master's so that she could explain the stories in her pictures. Because if you look at her work, and I hear people say this as they're observing, her artwork tells a tale. So that's another form of learning. That's another form of education.
I'm so glad you brought that up. And for me, it is the only way to learn, or to, I mean, you said it yourself. You remember George Washington standing on the boat. The visual is so strong.
Yes.
To tell a story. Again, some students would rather read it in words. Some students identify with the music and the story in the music. I mean, look how many stories are told in music. It's all about, especially country music. It's all about the story.
All about life. Right.
Yeah, and the stories are of life, and whether it's about history or current contemporary life. Regardless of what the story is about, it is a story, and we visualize that story as we're listening. Or if you're looking at a piece of artwork, you're visualizing your own interpretation. So learning art, making art as a verb, is not just for the artist. It's also for the viewer.
Yes.
Because the viewer then starts to imagine and interpret their own story. It might not be anywhere near what the artist intended, but it brings up a dialogue. It brings up a dialogue within yourself, and if you're lucky enough to be with someone looking at the same piece of work or with the artist, then you start to create this dialogue. Mm-hmm. I do have a couple. So what I have, I'm going to jump to say that through all of this, and since my degree, I just graduated a few years ago. I mean, I'm 61 and I've just graduated a few years ago, but I'm a lifelong learner, and I would love to go for my PhD. I mean, I still, just because there's so much to learn, so much to do and know. But what I have decided, though, is, and this is why I'm so attracted to Joseph Beuys, I don't make a lot of art. I don't paint. I can paint and I can draw. I can.
She's a magnificent artist.
No, I can, but I prefer to do things, work with my hands. I prefer to work out in nature. I balance rocks. I braid grass. I take photographs of images that are abstracted in water, and I mean just different areas. But this is one thing I learned. I'm going to tell you a couple of things that I learned. I mean, I learned a lot from my MFA, but the two most important things is why I make art. What am I trying to say? Using the tools, selecting tools and materials to assist in telling the story. What is it I want to say? How am I going to say it with my art? What materials and what tools am I going to use to tell this story? So it's not always painting. It's not always drawing. If it was, and that was the point I was going to make, then yeah, I would paint something. But if I want to tell the story about connecting to nature, then I would go out in my yard and braid grass. It's that kind of thought process, and I could go into that whole definition and description. But the point is that I don't always use the same materials. Right now I'm rusting. I'm staining paper and fabric with rusted materials in my backyard, and I have a little well and water and vinegar and salt, and I'm just using rust that comes from nature, from the sun, from the heat, and it's to tell another story. But that's just an example. The other thing I have realized since graduating is that I'm too old to sit around and wait to be discovered. So, and looking back in my past experiences with sports and art and education, I have realized that my biggest contribution has been in producing events, productions, So I decided that this is an area I'm going to go back into. It's something I can do from home. I spend a lot of time on the internet. I meet wonderful people, and I'm creating and curating and producing art events.
I've been to a couple of them, and each time they are more amazing than the previous.
Well, this one coming up in February is going to blow your socks off, I hope. But before that now, I just want to say at the end of October, I will be curating the art night for the Spring Hill Suites by Marriott on University Parkway. And what happens with the Spring Hill Suites, which is just really interesting and good for them, internationally, the Spring Hill Suites branding is all about bringing the community together through art, which is a wonderful thing. So I have been asked to curate last year and this year to bring the community, Sarasota Manatee community, together through art. So I have invited this new organization, Association of Florida Teaching Artists, to be the art. Yeah, be the art. And so they're going to come together and perform, and they're going to read poetry and stories, and we're going to hang some art, and we're going to show sculptures and dance and music. And
yes, I know a number of these people, and I'm very confident that in time we will be interviewing them as well.
I hope so. Yeah, they're brilliant artists and wonderful, and should be heard, should be seen. And so there is that. And then in February, which is a little ways away, but I just want to mention that I have the author, educator, and photographer Bruce Jackson from Buffalo, New York, is coming down to show with my work and Lori Loveberry George. The three of us have a show together, and he's coming down to do lectures and conversations, which you might be interested in interviewing.
Oh, yes, I would be.
And attending the conversation at the Sarasota Architectural Salvage, and the exhibit will be at the Hub on Fruitville. But more about that later.
Do you have a title for that yet?
In Your Face. The Power of Portraiture. In Your Face. Yeah, Bruce is an amazing person. I can't wait to meet him, but we've emailed back. We're pen pals right now, but
e-pals.
But he has agreed to come. He's written over 20 books. He's researched for the last 50 years about prisons, and he's gone into prisons, taken photographs. He has a drawer full of mugshots from the 1920s, 30s, which Lori Loveberry George was fascinated with and started using to exercise her magnificent skill in portraiture.
Yes.
And so I said to Lori, and again, here's my way of thinking art is a verb. I said, Lori, why are you so attracted to these haunting images, the haunting, very desperate looking people? Right. And she said, every piece I do, I feel like I'm doing a self-portrait. And she said, I feel sometimes like I'm in prison in my own life. And it dawned on me how often I have felt that way in my life. And I think it's a very natural, normal thing to feel. What makes us different from the criminal? And I've been researching this for months now. And working on this one project for months, looking into the psychology of depression and suppression and all of these things that might cause a person to actually act out to the point where they end up in prison for the rest of their lives. And I have to go back to that whole scenario where we have an imagination and we materialize what we imagine sometimes. And all I can guess is that these people materialize what they imagine. Why do they imagine these horrible acts? Environment. Some people, I'm sure, it's bio.
Right.
It's
it's I don't know, a depth of emotion that you're seeing in these pictures.
Right.
And I would suggest to anyone in our listening audience, the next time you go to a gallery or an event where there's an exhibit of work, before you say, I just don't get it.
Right.
Really look at it. You've got a picture, and I believe it's a photograph, because you did a series of, and I wish I could remember the title. I know I've written it somewhere, but it was The Beautiful World with Mankind's touch, and here she doesn't even know what I'm talking about.
Oh, environmental reflux.
Yes.
Is it? Yeah.
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
And it's the picture of it looks like a stone wall with a window, and I looked at it and I looked at it, and of course I'm thinking, how clever, how imaginative, oh my. And then one time I looked at it very closely, and I saw a cigarette butt off to the side, and I realized that this was not a window. this was a sewer drain and a
Right.
sidewalk.
Right.
And it's like, the simplest things you see art in. And we as human beings just need to open our eyes and look.
Yeah, and that's a good point. When you are looking at art, look beyond the surface of the piece and what you're seeing in front of you. This particular piece, you say, it is called The Window, and when you look through this little window of cement, what you're seeing on the other side is a beautiful scene of a pond and green trees and blue sky, and it's just a beautiful view. But it is a drainage for a cement dock, if you will. And somebody had just, thrown their cigarette butt to the corner. And so I hate this word, I hate using this word, but juxtaposition of, the contrast between that beautiful scene and then someone, destroying the beauty with
leaving their
droppings. That's a good way to put it. I didn't want to say it, but it is, and that was the point, is that it brings out the character of the human being. Mm-hmm.
All right, we're just about ready to close here. So if you will, give us the title, time, place, and date of the next project.
Well, I hate to say I don't have a title yet, but I can tell you that, and I don't have a confirmed date. We're still meeting, but we do know that it will be at the end of October. It will be at the Sarasota Manatee Spring Hill Suites by Marriott on University Parkway. And it will include the organization Association for Florida Teaching Artists, and they will be presenting their work and what they do, and we are hoping that educators come out to see this so that they can connect with these teachers and invite them to their schools.
Right. And parents come out and bring your children and see what appeals to them. I taught in a Montessori school for a while, and in Montessori you follow the child. Mm-hmm. And our society doesn't necessarily do that. And it's interesting to see what the child is interested in. Mm-hmm. And if you see a project that appeals to you, don't be afraid to mention it to your teacher. Sometimes they just need validation.
Right.
Yes.
Right, yeah, good point.
You can learn more about Pamela Callender at her website, pamelacallender.com, on LinkedIn and on Facebook. She spells her name Callender. Thank you, Pam.
Thank you, Nancy.